Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me this evening, this afternoon, on the 28th of the 1st, 2024. 28th of the 1st, 2024, a nice, lovely Sunday evening in the UK, and of course, 4 o'clock in Jamaica, a nice, should I say, a hot, lovely day in Jamaica as well. And I want to thank you so much for joining me this evening on Diaspora Connections, connecting with Jamaica. And, you know, for the few weeks and since I started talking, dealing with the show, hi, Mark Cameron, respect. Uh, the essence of it is more of an educational level. And the couple weeks before, I had the discussion with Professor Rosalie Hamilton, and the discussion was about governance. Governance, and as you can see the title there, which was Improving Governance and Human Rights in Jamaica. Improving governance. And tonight, what we're going to look at is the power of your voice in a democracy. The power of your voice in a democracy. Have you ever think about when and after the campaigning is done, you wonder, do you have a voice? Or your voice is silent for the next 4 or 5 years? What is your voice? What can your voice do? Is that the end of it until we go back to the ballot box? The power of one's voice is a cornerstone of any thriving democracy, playing a crucial role in shaping the direction and character of a society. There are several ways in which significance of one's voice is evident in a democratic context. And representation and participation is one. In a democracy, the voice of each individual is fundamental to the concept of representation through voting, active representation, political accountability. Collective voices of citizens serve as a mechanism for holding leaders accountable by expressing their opinions, raising concerns, and engaging in political discourse. The power of one's voice, and this is social change and advocacy, the power of one's voice extends beyond the ballot box. That's just something we're going to discuss. Extend beyond the ballot box. The fostering informed decision making. A vibrant democracy relies on an informed citizenry. Each voice, your voice, collective voice, contributes to a public discourse by sharing perspective, ideas, and information. Cultural expression and diversity. The diversity of voices within a democracy. Civic education and awareness. The act of voicing opinion is integral to civic education, engaging in debates. And the power of one's voice is not just a personal expression, but a collective force that shapes the destiny of democratic society. Many years ago, I used to love this song, I've Got the Power, by a group named Snap. I used to break dance. I'm from Ochuria, straight out of Ochi. And I've been listening to that song all over again, I've Got the Power. And the more I listen to that song about I've got the power, it resonates in me so much that as people, as individuals, we've got the power. So when you vote the government out, guess what you get? You get the government in. For the tenure of success governments, whether 4 years or 5 years, it is. So I bring in Professor Rosalie Hamilton to explore the concept of democracy and your voice. And Rosalie Hamilton is the co-chair of Advocacy Network. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you again for continuing and as our focus is to continue this program and
Yeah,
education. Thank you so much, Professor.
good. Always good to be here.
Fantastic. And I sorry. And I want to welcome those on TikTok. For those on TikTok, you're not able to see Professor Rosa Limited, but you can go over onto YouTube. For those on Facebook and YouTube as well, thank you, Michelle Clark, for coming in, Mark Cameron, and for those for this interesting discussion. Professor Rosalie Hamilton, the key question is power of your voice, uncovering the significance in a democracy. What is a democracy?
Yeah, it's a very good question, a great place to start
Yeah.
because there's so many different conceptions of democracy.
Yes.
And, people tend to think about, for example, the values that are associated with a democracy. The freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, those kinds of freedoms that are associated with democracy. And a lot of people think about democracy um, as for example, electoral democracy. You know,
Yes.
so we associate this idea of democracy with going to elections and voting. And so once you vote, or once a country establishes a free and fair system of elections and a vote takes place, then there's almost a declaration that the country is democratic.
Yes.
And, keen observers have realized over time that, listen, you know, that's not enough. The democracy doesn't end, or the citizens' participation in a democracy doesn't end at
Mm.
voting. And in fact, a good place to start to deepen our understanding of democracy is through the words of Abraham Lincoln, that
Yes.
talked about democracy as a rule of the people, for the
Mm.
people, by the people. People, that's a very familiar
Yes.
phrase, We talk about, it rolls off our tongues, democracy is for the people, of the people, by the people. And what it does, though, it centers this idea of a democracy, not
Mm.
so much in the values, and those are important, and not so much in the election, as much as that is important, but in the idea that we're organizing a society by people, for people, in the people's interests,
Yes.
and you create the society that the people are at the center. So the idea then that you are setting up a society that is effectively ruled by the people, governed by people, is the idea that the Greeks had. And in fact, they set up what we label today as direct democracy, where
Yes.
people have this direct say and they are the ones who are making all the decisions. Over time, we've recognized that it is a little too cumbersome, especially if you create a city and a state where there are
Yeah.
millions of people. You now need representatives. So we're talking about representative democracy on the one hand, where we vote the people we want to represent us. And on the other hand, we talk about mechanisms in which the people can directly have a say. And I think
Mm.
today, when we're talking about this expression of democracy, we're talking about, at its core, the idea of rule by the people, a
Yes.
system of government in which the power and the authority lies with the people, and that we have representation of the people in a kind of representative democracy, or we have expressions of direct democracy.
That is very interesting. And I'm just looking at the rule by the people power, consent of the people, authority lies with the people, rule by the people. But is this happening in a sense? Is it happening? Is
Yeah.
it just a it's just a figure of speech, or just something that makes it sound nice, roll off the tongue, the power of the people? Is it
You
happening?
know, that's the question, because when you observe democracy, I mean, we observe, for example, the biggest democracy next to us, the United States, and we've observed for decades that the democratic principles doesn't seem to equally apply,
Mm.
because we understood for decades, the kinds of pressure African Americans were under, or minority groups
Mm.
across America. And we saw that it doesn't seem to apply to everyone.
Yes.
And so I think over time, more and more, the ideal of a democracy seemed to be fading and moving away, because the experience of democracy has been not as people expected, if you like, or it's not quite where we think it ought to be. Let me put it that way. And
Yeah.
so, data that has tracked citizen support for democracy for a long time has been showing a declining trend. And so those are indicators that generally across the world, democracy is at risk. And
Mm.
there's data that we've seen with respect to our own democracy that suggests that it is at risk. The one that everybody knows is the voting trend. And we've seen that this decline in trend of voting over time. We've moved from a high of about 80% of the population voting back in the 80s, right? And
Yes.
then we noticed that that decline it's just on a declining trend, and we're now talking about 37% of the voting
Yes.
population
That's the last
voting.
one
So
in Jamaica as well, isn't it?
absolutely. So that's troubling. We've seen these studies, for example, the Latin American Public Opinion Project study. They've tracked democracy over time. And from 2014, they pointed to the fact that, Jamaica's democracy is at risk. It
Mm.
tracked the low system support for democracy as an ideal, as a concept, and low levels of tolerance. And more recently, in 2021, this is a study that's done every 2 years or so, right? And in
Yes.
2021, it said that the support for democracy has not recovered to the levels that it was a decade ago. So that the public support for democracy has been declining systematically for more than
Yes.
10 years. And that study pointed to something I want to read for the listeners. It said, signals of increasing corruption permissiveness in some spheres, evidenced by an absence of sustained public outrage in
Yes.
response to many high profile corruption scandals, is also quite troubling. And
Mm.
so the very absence of our voice is highlighted here as important in explaining the
Yes.
declining trend in democracy. Because you can't have a robust democracy if we are silent, if we're not active participants. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
And what we're talking and what we're looking at is the absence of the voice of the people. We're
Absolutely.
talking about the people who put these government in that process of democracy, which is as we say that the real and understanding of democracy to the average person would be every 5 years they vote them in and they vote them out, and that is a clean set of democracy, but that's not the full essence of a working democracy.
Right. And so if we get to the core idea of
Yes.
a framework in which the people's will is expressed, the Abraham Lincoln notion of us a government by the people,
People.
then we have to ask the question, where is the people in the decision making of a
Mm.
democracy? What are the mechanisms in which people can influence these decisions? Those become very key questions. So that is the part of this ideal of democracy that I think we are losing sight of.
Mm.
That if we want our will to be felt, to be experienced, to be heard in a democracy, then we have
Yeah.
to become active participants.
So, in focusing then on Jamaica, for argument's sake, would we say that in Jamaica, there's democracy is in trouble?
Yes, and I would say that, as I said, we've been talking about with respect to the trends in voting. We've talked
Yes.
about the studies that have shown
Yes.
declining trends in democracy. There's also evidence, for example, that civic engagement in civic activities, citizens' engagement in whether it's a church, whether it is community activities, all of those kinds of positive engagement in the society that can support and enhance democracy is on decline. So when we look across the evidence that we have, it suggests that our democracy is in trouble. And when we look today at the extent to which there are unheard of governance issues that we're seeing on the table,
Mm.
and the voice of the Jamaican people is silent. We've had that experience just last year in response to the unconscionable um,
Yes.
increases in salary. And we thought, everybody was so outraged and we're talking about it. But when it came to actual protests and demonstration, the numbers were small. And then you got a sense that people were afraid to speak.
Yes.
But
Yes.
there's also a sense in which the Jamaicans were saying, I saw the thing set.
So it goes.
I said, God, it's just said set. And so you can't do anything to change it. And
Mm.
so people just accepted the status quo. And I think that is feeding into a very dangerous situation where because you can't do nothing and so the thing set,
Mm.
you can't bother vote.
And then
You know?
and then the apathy tend to increase,
Absolutely.
whereby people are now saying, "Boy, it don't make no sense. It don't make sense. I vote for this person because, as I said all the while, you vote the government in, you get the government. You vote the government out, you get the government in, and it's like the same old, same old." So how do we then? How do how are people then inspired to recognize and to accept and to understand that there's power still within their hands, within their reach?
You know, well, I think it's how we engage this conversation and this experience of living in a
Yeah.
society we call Jamaica. And I always like to start with this idea of, do you see yourself as an owner in
Yeah.
Jamaica, or you see
Mm,
yourself as a tenant or a squatter? Right? I
yeah.
mean, that's kind of how I like to think about it, because if you see yourself as an owner, then you clearly are going to take responsibility as owners do. I mean, if you own something, you actively manage that thing that you own. You don't, if you own a house, you don't just allow the manager to go in the house and fix what they want to fix and add
Mm,
on anything new to your house and do what they want to, paint it how they want in their colors. I said, you don't do that. If you own a house, you are the ones making the decisions about extensions and additions and colors and so on. And so
so
I
yeah.
suggest that if we see ourselves as owners, we will behave differently. If we see ourselves as a squatter or as a tenant, I mean, I think then you feel, well, it's somebody else's responsibility. Somebody else will pay the house, somebody will fix the house, somebody else will do what is required for you to live comfortably in that house.
Well, well,
And
well. Some of the comments which are coming true is that not only in Jamaica democracy is an illusion. People feel they have no options, so they are silent. That's what Mark Cameron says. And that's because Jamaicans complain today and comply tomorrow. And this is the whole bit regarding the unconscionable 200, 300% increase, whereby people make noise, hoo-ha. But when it comes to action, when you say come out and actually make a sound and declare your position, there's a silence there. So therefore, is it that the master now, not the master, the government persons who are now deemed or in that position of owners or deemed to be owners, they just carry on because they don't see any opposition from the people, is it?
well, if you think about it, it's almost human.
Yeah,
If somebody gives you the power
yeah,
to transform your house and do whatever you want to do with your house,
mm,
and you want to create a bigger house because you think that you want to put in a jacuzzi or what have you, and the owner is not saying anything. The owner is not telling you can't do it. The owner is not engaging you. The
yes,
owner literally walked away and you're free to do whatever you want to do. Why not? So that's a way to think about it. That if you don't assert your right as a owner, if you don't take charge, then the people you ask to manage your affair on your behalf will act as if they're the owners.
wow.
It kind of is human. It's kind of logical and inevitable. And I think it is therefore so important for us to start with this idea that we own Jamaica. Jamaica belongs to all of us. It is not the ownership, it's not the
Yes,
property of the. In fact, let me remind Jamaicans that, and your listeners, that the days when a country was treated as property was
mm,
back in the days when you had royalty. The
mm,
monarchs, the monarchs treated the society as if it is their property,
mm.
and everybody else was simply part of property ownership. Those days are done. And in 2024, we need to wake up to the idea that we are owners of Jamaica.
But
And with
can I,
ownership
yeah.
comes
But can I just yeah,
responsibility.
can I just pick up that as you mentioned, we must see ourselves as owners, and one of the things I keep saying all the while is that persons and people must recognize that they are the boss, and that the government officials or those in power that we have given to them or loaned to them for the 4 or 5 years, they must recognize that we are the boss. You say if we own Jamaica, we should accept the ownership and responsibility for Jamaica. We are responsible for our democracy. This responsibility and ownership of our country is civic responsibility. And now you say that the the in the past with the colonial is masters, that was deemed to be. But do you think that with the essence that the King of England is still the head of state of Jamaica, there's a psychological impact as well at the same time, you know, that is affecting people psychology where they believe that the king land, the UDC is king land, a crown land. I keep hearing a lot of that saying it's a crown's land.
Yes, but I don't know. I don't think that the idea of we don't own Jamaica
Yes.
is stemming from the fact that we currently have a king. It's a
Mm,
long-standing idea, all the way, going all the way back to a history of slavery and colonization. I think
yeah.
the dispossessiveness of Jamaicans is
Mm,
rooted in the idea that the people who are running the country they're running the country as if they are the owners.
mm,
It is that our representatives, the executive, are running the country as if they are the landlords. You know, they are the ones making all the decisions on our
yeah.
behalf,
Yes.
and that there are few opportunities that we have to engage them and to
Mm,
influence their decisions.
yes.
So they take the power we give them at elections and they run with it.
Mm,
And they run with it and make all kinds of decisions. And by the time we begin to catch up and make a little noise, sometimes it's too late. Horse gone through.
yes.
Become billions of dollars. I mean, the Auditor General is telling us now, trillions of dollars is unaccounted for, not
Mm,
proper accountability. Whether it is reports are not being submitted, whether there are indication of breaches of the law, whether there is evidence or indication of
mm,
corruption, all of that, billions of dollars. Now, I think that should suggest to Jamaicans that
yes.
we have to pause and think. We've spent a lot, we have spent and are spending a lot of money on oversight institutions, whether it is
Yes.
the Auditor General, whether it's the Integrity
Integrity
Commission,
Commission.
millions, billions, but we still feel dispossessed. And I
Yeah.
suggest that what we really want are mechanisms to strengthen our voice. We can talk about that later,
Yeah. You
but
know.
we have to
Yeah.
get into that detail there.
Yes.
Why are our voices? What are the problems that limit our capacity to really influence the decisions that all affect us?
And that's the whole thing about civic participation as well. I tongue got tied. It's very important what you're saying about the people and getting the people out there. I see Mark Cameron say right here that the government use our money to pay off and intimidate the press, so we have no voices. But like your shows and others, we almost stand up and be heard. We are objection to corruption, lack of integrity and transparency. I said to someone on my show last night, talking SIP, that they were alluding that the attack, the attacking of the Integrity Commission, and I said you can't say the attacking because I believe all of these organizations fit into a particular position like a jigsaw to give good governance. So not to see the Integrity Commission as an attack in the government. And I saw something today whereby I saw the Prime Minister said we are now sorting out outros with the roads and blah blah blah. And and reading through some of the comments, you realize the JLP, the JLP, and I'm saying, hang on a second, any government have a responsibility based on the taxpayers of the country to fix government, fix the roads and fix everything. It is not like at them do it. You know what I'm trying to say? It is the responsibility of government to do these things. So it's like there's a misconstrued thing about what the role of government is, even to the government.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have the executive who executes the law. I mean, that's kind of how we run the society.
Mm.
So they have a job to execute the law. And
Yes.
when the budgets are passed and decisions are made about how the money will be spent, that's their job.
Yes.
So, they are very clear and they have the power, they have the mechanism, they have the laws. What
Mm.
is not so clear is the role, our role in this
Yes.
democracy. How do we get our will heard beyond the vote of the people who we ask to manage our country on our behalf? That's
Mm.
the issue. This idea of our civic responsibility
Yes.
in a democracy goes to the kinds of civic, legal, and moral opportunities we have. I'm sorry, responsibilities that we have. So on the one
Yes.
hand, we have to obey the law. I mean, if we're running a society, we have to obey the law, we have to pay our taxes, we have to do all these things. But very importantly, there's a moral obligation we have. Some of it is legal.
Mm.
As you know, as a lawyer in the law of tort, you have to care for others. You have
Yes.
to, you can't ignore the well-being of others, and so there's a legal obligation. But we do have, I think, a moral obligation that speaks to the responsibility of a
Mm.
citizen in a democracy. That's kind of how I like to think about that,
Yes.
because it is there that we have an obligation to vote. Now,
Yes.
in some countries, remember, you have a legal obligation to vote, right?
Yes.
If you don't vote, you can be arrested, right? Or
Mm.
fined or something. But
I think in
we,
Australia have that sort of thing there.
right,
Yes.
exactly. But in
Mm.
Jamaica, we have an option.
Yes.
But it's not a trivial option. It's an option that's all right. But you have to be thoughtful. All of us have to be thoughtful of what does it mean if only 10% of us who have the vote.
Yes.
What does that really
Yes.
mean? What does democracy look like if only a few of us vote? And that's what is happening now. Only 37% of us who are eligible to vote is voting. So that's a question. Ought we to exercise this moral obligation
Mm.
to vote, to participate in our budget, to
Yes.
hold our elected officials accountable?
Let's
You know,
stop. Let's stop for a second. Hold your MP accountable. How do people, or how are the MPs held accountable?
well,
Um,
ultimately it's the vote. You
yes.
vote them out if they don't do a good job.
All
But
right.
there are other mechanisms, because we can definitely engage our MPs on an ongoing basis. We
Mm.
as citizens can say to our member of parliament, listen, as our representative, we want you to meet with us on a monthly basis. We
Yes.
want to tell us about your conversations in Parliament. Why did you vote a certain way? Are you only voting along party lines, or are
Yes.
you going to Parliament to represent us? That's the conversation we should have with
Yes.
our representatives, right? They don't go there to represent a party's interests. They go there to represent our interests.
But we
So
are seeing. But we are seeing otherwise that they are voting.
absolutely. And that's perhaps it's because we have not held them accountable. We have
Yeah.
not said to our MPs, listen, you see this thing where you go to parliament and all you're doing is voting a party line? Listen, we have issues in our constituency. We have issues as citizens that we want
Yes.
you to represent. And it crosses party lines. We have issues that both the JLP and the PMP and other people who are not voting these two
Mm.
political parties want you to address.
A few years ago, when Reverend Ian Pasley was alive in the UK, Northern Ireland, the Speaker of the House was Betty Bouchard, the late Betty Bouchard. Kicked him out of the House when he said something, and I think I don't know what he said, but maybe along the line like the Prime Minister is disingenuous with the truth or something like that or whatever, and he kept on and kept on saying it, and the Speaker said, I don't want you to go, but please, can you change the words? I should make it so nice for him. And he said, I represent my constituents. I am speaking up for my constituents. And if I come here and I don't speak up for them, they're going to kick me out. So you kick me out. And he said, you kick me out of the House. And that's what he did. And I remember Dennis Skinner, who was one of the elder fathers of the House and House of Commons, he was calling David Cameron a liar. And what he was using the word dodgy Dave. And the Speaker of the House, which was John Burker, said to him, order, order, order. Don't say that. You shouldn't say that to an honorary member. And Dennis Skinner said, okay, I hear you. But I'm gonna keep saying it. He's dodgy Dave. And then they kicked him out. And Dawn Butler also said it one time that Boris Johnson was a liar. She said it. They kicked her out. But the point about it, what I saw right there was that these MPs went against their party line, went against their whatever, and spoke up for their constituents.
Yes.
Spoke up
And,
for their
and that's the job. And it speaks to who we vote for. Are we
yes,
voting for the MP or are we voting for a party?
yes,
Right? And that's a distinction that we should make very clear in our minds when we vote. Because yes, we may want to support our party, but we ought to be supporting the member of parliament who's going to represent our will.
yes.
Right? And we ought to hold that member of parliament accountable
Accountable.
in mechanisms that we can create and mechanisms that ought to be in law. So, for
Yes,
example, one of the things that we've been hearing about and we haven't seen any tangible move towards it is impeachment. So,
yes. I think, yeah, I think
impeachment or recall, these are provisions
recall.
in which we can hold
Yes,
them accountable.
yes.
And if we want that, we have to fight for it. We
Mhm.
have to make our voices heard loudly that we want the right to recall our
Yes,
MPs if they're not doing a good job. We want the right to impeach corrupt politicians, etc.
yes.
So these are the kinds of things that we shouldn't just take for granted, just sit back and wait until somebody gives us this law. We have to fight for it.
The recall thing is a very powerful thing, because right now the UK is going through a raft of by-elections recently. A couple of them have been recalled, and there's an MP once who was caught lied. She lied that she wasn't driving or whatever. The worst thing to do is to lie to the authorities over here in the UK. Sometimes the line is more worse than actually the incident which took place. She was recalled. And so you see the process of recall is happening whereby a percentage of the constituency vote. That's it. And it works so perfectly because it gives the people power back to say that even though you voted this person in 2015, you still can get them out in 2016 if they fall short. So when we see certain things happening with MP, and I still have to say this, I'll drop this one in and we'll drop it again. When I see like 6 MPs or ministers of government or whatever, whosoever they are, senators, are being investigated for illicit enrichment. And of course, we're saying it's an investigation. This is not say it has happened that they are guilty. It's an investigation. And I keep thinking about this, Professor Rosalea, and I say this to everybody else as well. When these MPs went and knocked on people's door, they say to them, I am here to represent you. I want to be your man or your woman for the hour. But then when your pants is caught down, it's a secret. It shouldn't be a secret. You should go back to them and say to them, my name is Sylbourne, Sydial. Something happened, blah, blah, blah. But trust me, it didn't happen. And I'm going to work with it. But I just let you guys know. Why can't that be done, Ross Professor? Talk back to the people.
We have to demand it. There's an obligation we have to
Yeah.
say, this is what we want. This is how we want. This is the nature of the relationship we want with our
Mm,
representatives. And it is our voice that's silent that is a big part of the problem of the democracy. We are
mm,
not playing our part. We're not
yes.
undertaking the responsibilities of citizens in a democracy.
Yes.
And as long as we lose sight, and I'm going to go back to it, go lose sight of the idea that when we're talking about this democracy, we're talking about rule by the people. We're
Yes.
talking about the idea that the authority of government resides in the people.
Mm,
Sovereignty of the state is in the hands of the people. And as long as we forget that, then we expect that
mm,
somebody else ought to do the right thing.
yes.
And I think this conversation is about putting this spotlight on our role and our responsibility, as difficult as it is. And it's not easy because A, we need to understand it, and
Yes.
B, we need to get into the roots of what are the mechanisms, what are the things we can do, What are the things that,
Mm.
we're overwhelmed and unable to do? And one of the things that I talk about is that part of this definition of, our responsibility
Yes.
is also our responsibility to be informed and
Yes.
to share information and to get access to the information. Thank God we have Access to Information Act. Many
Yes.
countries in the world don't have such a piece
Yes.
of legislation, but we have it. We need to use it, get the information we need to guide our actions. We have freedom of the press. We should be proud at the fact that Jamaica ranks way up in the world ranking. In fact, number one in the hemisphere a few years ago,
Yes.
um, in terms of press freedom. Now, we need to use the information we have. We have reports going to Parliament, the Auditor
Yes.
General report, Integrity Commission report, laying out all kinds of breaches and, difficulties that we see in the governance arrangements,
Right.
and we are sometimes oblivious to the details. We kind of hear this and take that, but we need to sit down and read those reports. Now, again, a lot
Yes.
of responsibility, and if we don't want to do it, let's support organizations that do it. I
Yes.
mean, more and more, everybody's hearing about JAM, the Jamaica Accountability Meter
Yes.
Portal. They do a lot of work sitting down, going through those reports, and providing us access to either summaries or action that we can do to kind of highlight, make
Yes.
our job easier as citizens with who want to undertake this responsibility. But of course, we all have 95 jobs and we're
Yes.
overwhelmed with just life.
Yes.
So we need to recognize that as long as we have this role, we have to find some time and we have to get active. And the
Fantastic.
information is important.
Fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for joining me this evening on Diaspora Connection, connecting with Jamaica. And I have with me Professor Rosalie Hamilton from Advocate Co-Chair for Advocacy Network. Thank you for those on TikTok. Thanks for those questions as well. Cool Breeze, welcome. Those on YouTube and Facebook and also on Instagram, I can see Genesis, Luxury Villas. Thank you so much. Rosemary Francis Binder said something here. Our representative must have or cultivate integrity, but I'm recognizing something here that we are spinning something on its head here, which is we are placing some pressure on the people as well.
Yes.
The-
The
the- the-
people must have integrity
yeah,
too.
yeah, and we are placing some pressure on the people because I think I think it is a miss of information said something about creatures of parliament, integrity commission, creatures of parliament. All these creatures of parliament are in place, and it's like they're seen as if these creatures of parliament have come in like the boogeyman attacking the parliament. So therefore, with these things in place, I'm picking up that the people need to Rosemary Rosemary Francis Binder, Jeanette Calder, Daniel, and yourself we really need to actually let people know that these organizations are there and to work with them in a way to hold the government accountable. Because I believe strongly that a government, in a sense, would really love if there's a strong opposition, if there's a strong accountability, and it constrain their hands. Do you think?
Well, I want to say that a government in a democracy ought to
Yes,
encourage and benefit from the
yes,
voices of civil society. First of all, that's who they are there to represent. Civil society is everybody else other than the people in government, right?
yes,
And so, you know, this is the constituency, the country that they're trying to represent, people in civil society. And so when they speak, they ought to listen. They
mm,
ought to listen because if they see it as their obligation and responsibility to carry out the will of the people,
yes,
then the people ought to be encouraged to make their voices heard. And importantly, it's
mm,
worth reflecting on the moments in our history
yes,
when we, in fact, made our voices heard and the government listened.
yes,
And I'm going to highlight a few because just more in more recent times, we can go back and there's a long list.
yes. I want
And
to
I
find it for
quickly
you.
want to
Yeah,
say that, as much as there's evidence of listening, the question goes beyond these moments when the government listened, but to what are the institutional mechanisms in which we can listen, when we can make our voices heard on an ongoing basis, and they respond. So
Yes.
what happened was in 2014, Peter Phillips, the Minister of Finance at the time, made an announcement that he was going to put a tax, a bank tax on withdrawals and transactions, right?
Yes.
And the public was outraged because it was in the context where there are all these high bank fees and bank charges and so on and so on. There was this very, very loud outcry. Within weeks or days, the minister backed off and withdrew the tax.
And I'm going to ask this question for a teaching moment. How did the people, how was their outcry? What was the
What
means?
was the mechanism? Absolutely.
Yes.
Social media was used.
Mm.
Letters were written,
Yes.
articles were written to the Gleaner and so on, to newspapers. And, the chatter was there. It was
Yes.
there. The media played its role. The
Yes.
media, interviews, commentary, and so on and so on. So the voice of the society was heard using all the mechanisms that were available. And of course, back in 2014, the strength of social media was never as strong as it is today.
Yes,
Much
yes.
stronger, and therefore we have these social media mechanisms. We have videos, we have TikTok, we have all these things that we can use to make our voice heard. Want to remind again the public on 2018 when our justice, the Brian Sykes, was appointed as acting Chief Justice.
Yes.
No such provision, we've never heard of that creature before, contrary to our constitution. And so within a month, he was formally appointed, consistent with the constitution. But
Yes.
the lawyers were very active at that point, and they're saying, no, we don't understand this, and so on and so on. And it changed. Again, we saw in 2020 where there was this attempt to keep cabinet papers secret, right? Cabinet papers are kept secret for 20 years. Now, there was a suggestion or a decision that it would go to 70 years.
Wow.
And Jamaicans say, no.
Them dead. All them people are dead already. They're not dead by that time.
Listen, yeah, absolutely. That's not good enough. The festival song, everybody should remember the festival song, right?
Yes.
In 2022, we're celebrating 60 years. And the minister said, boy, we couldn't get a good festival song. No. Jamaicans was all over social media on that. And before you know it, the minister got the message, went back to the drawing board, and a song was created. And we could see several other instances, the idea of this appointment of Rocky Mead as cabinet secretary and not in compliance with the constitutional provisions. So, again, this was a breach and so on and so on. He withdrew, and that matter was settled. We saw Malif who fought, the minister Malif who fought when it came to the early, within months of the establishment, within a month or two of the establishment of the CRC, she went to the nation and said, we have a consensus.
Yes.
Right? And we are now going to table this bill.
Yes.
And of course, you know that story, you and others, many people said, hey, what about the people? Where is the consensus with the people? And what about the public education? And of course, everybody knows that the planned tabling of the bill is yet to happen because the people made their voices heard. And of course, I mentioned earlier the loud noise that the Advocates Network made and others made with respect to this unconscionable increase in salaries. And what happened there was that the Prime Minister refused to accept his over 200% increase, and by extension that affected the previous prime ministers whose salaries are pegged to his salary, and of course the wives of the deceased prime ministers, all of them were. So what it meant is that it saved taxpayers millions of dollars.
Yes.
Just by that loud outcry and the one decision by the prime minister not to accept it in the face of that loud outcry. So our voice matters.
and it's important that you mentioned voice, and we're going to talk about how to bolster the voices, because Robert Stevens and a few persons, I'm going to bring it, Rosemary, because a few members of the diaspora is here. Diaspora members must be allowed to vote just as USA citizens can. This is talking about the voice. And recent days you had Dr. Rupert Francis, and they're talking about the diaspora and the voices being quietened down based on some wranglings there. What do you think about the voice of the diaspora then coming in to bolster the voice of Jamaicans as well?
Well, again, sometimes we get confused with the term diaspora
Yes.
because, some Jamaicans have taken up a different citizenship and therefore they have abandoned their citizenship as Jamaicans.
Mm,
Now, are we talking about them? And I think sometimes we get confused. My own view is that as long as we're talking about citizens of Jamaica, whether you live at home or abroad, you ought to have a say. And that's my position. No, remember, in this is so important in the modern world because many of us as
I
Jamaicans,
got my pass. I'm showing my passport, my Jamaican passport. I still have it.
I see,
My
many of
license.
us, yeah, many of us in Jamaica, we have our homes here, we live here, but we go abroad for 6 months or a
Yeah,
year with the intention to come back. So we're catching overseas, so to speak, right?
yeah, yeah.
Right. But we live here. So are we part of the diaspora? We talk. So I think we need to disaggregate this group we call the diaspora when it comes to rights of the Jamaican citizen,
Mm,
right? Because every Jamaican citizen, whether you live at home or abroad, have a right to vote, have a right to participate in the running of the country, etc. Now, the details we can work out, right?
yeah.
Whether you come home to vote or whether you stay there and vote, that's another story. But and then, of course, eligibility in terms of the law with respect to residents, all of that means once you comply with the current laws, and we may have to tweak it to ensure that members who Jamaicans who live abroad can
Yes.
vote. In all of those things we can work out. But the principle for me is that Jamaicans who live at home and abroad have a right to have a say and to participate in the operations and functions of this
You know,
government.
I have to ask this question, and it is up there. Accountability is applicable when they can be removed. Anything else is a joke. Prime Minister has not yet declared his assets. What now? The big question is how can the people of Jamaica move the Prime Minister, inspire the Prime Minister, motivate the Prime Minister to declare this, which is 2 years outstanding or whatever? What can the people do, or they just have to vote him out?
Well, I want us to, and this is where I wanted us to end the conversation. I want to
Yes.
say that the people have a right to demand, to get involved in the constitutional arrangements and to
Mm,
put provisions in place to provide adequate oversight of these decisions, oversight of cabinet decisions, oversight of the executive general, and generally, and in particular, oversight of the decisions of the prime minister.
mm.
The prime minister is not a king. The prime minister is
Well,
not
somebody said yesterday the government officers and ministers are like royalty. They're treated as
well, that's
royalty.
the point. It ought not to be if we're talking about a democracy. We're not talking about a democracy. We're talking about a dictatorship, or we're talking about some new modern royal arrangement where people dictate to us and we have no say, then that's a whole other story. But as long as we're talking about a democracy and we have a right to have a say in these decisions, then we are talking about something different. And so oversight and mechanisms to hear our voice is important. I want to say this before
Mm,
I forget. The right to participate in public affairs is codified in international law.
yes.
When we look at Article 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all the way back in 1948, it speaks about everyone, every human being having a right to take part in the government of the country,
Mm,
directly or through representatives.
mm,
In 1967, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, Article 25, made it very clear that every citizen have a right and opportunity to take part in the conduct of public affairs. Specifically now, the conduct, and it goes on to define what the conduct of public affairs mean, right?
Yes.
And it includes very specifically arrangements that enable citizens to have a say, not just in, for example, shaping your constitution, a referendum, elections, of course, but popular assemblies and other kinds of arrangements where citizens can come together and have a say. But importantly, these arrangements must be in law or in the
Yes.
Constitution. And that is why this is such an important juncture for Jamaica now, because we need to put these arrangements in our Constitution. It's a human right. The right to participate in public affairs is a human right.
Yes.
And therefore, we need the details of it in our Constitution. And we need to put arrangements in place that, for example, I like to talk about the idea of our preamble. The preamble of a constitution sets the tone, right? And it talks about what we ought to do, or the aspirational things. We
Yes.
want to assert the fact that the Jamaican people is sovereign, right? We want to assert, we want language that says, we, the people of Jamaica, in
Yes.
order to complete this journey we're on since 1838, right? For freedom, self-determination, and so on. Those things need to be in the preamble. So it makes it very clear that we
Yes.
have the power, and the authority, the power and authority of government lies with us. So it's unambiguous, right? We
Yes.
want, for example, the right to petition our parliament. These are rights that other countries have. We need that right, and that right needs to be in the Constitution. I suggest that we need to think again about our Senate and elect our senators to
Yes.
strengthen our voice so that they can assist in representing us in different ways.
Because they
Right?
can be removed easily, isn't it? They can remove
Well,
easily.
again, those are rights we can put in place. We can also
Yes.
talk about rights for recall, and that can be
Yes.
in the Constitution, right? I talk also about strengthening our local government and making sure that our voice shapes local laws, right? And in fact, provisions with respect to recall and so on. Some of, in fact, our impeachment arrangement exists at the local government level.
Yes.
Most people aren't even aware of that. And so
Yes.
we need to exercise that. Again, it is in law. And we ought to, I always come back to this idea of participating in our budget.
Budget.
It's our budget, it's our money, we ought to have a say.
So when,
So
when you when you say participatory budget, are you trying to say that we need to have some audience with the Nigel Clark, the ministry, that Ministry of Finance?
it's not about audience. It's about, there are many mechanisms that exist all across the
Yes.
world, right? But the one that is very doable and that is manageable, right, is the idea that at the local government level, there's a budget,
Yes.
and a portion of the budget can be directly decided by citizens. Right? And so
Yes.
citizens decide what they want to do with, say, 20 million of their tax money. Now, I use that figure because you know that that's the figure that goes directly to the MPs. And the
Yes. Yes.
MPs influence how that money is spent. But we can have a mechanism in which $20 million is decided directly by citizens. And there are all kinds of models all over the place in terms of how it's done.
You're right.
And,
Because
and
there's a
citizens,
yeah. There's a
citizens
yeah.
get
Go
to
on, please.
solve the problems that are of concern to them, the
Yes.
priorities that they see. In crime-ridden communities where crime is a problem, they spend the money in the way they see fit to
Yes.
solve the problem
Yes.
of crime.
In my local area, my ward, the ward for the local area in Catford here, Lewisham, whenever they are going to allocate some funds for certain things, the councillors, they'll have a ward meeting or so, and bring in priorities and bring citizens around the table for, and then do a vote. So therefore, it is seen to be participated with a lot of people. So there are different ways how this can be done, and I like the bit about participatory budgeting. But somehow, when we look at these things, and somebody say it's like, can this be deemed in a sense? I'm not being facetious, like a pipe dream, Professor.
Well,
I mean,
let me
yeah,
say this quickly. Freedom from slavery was a pipe dream.
was a pipe dream. That's correct.
Democracy is a pipe
Yes,
dream.
yes.
These aspirational goals of a society are pipe dreams, are pipe dreams. They all are.
But they
You
became
know,
a reality. Yeah.
yeah, but they become reality when citizens systematically, on a regular basis, generations to generations, fight. Think about it. I want the audience just to pause and go back to our history.
Yes,
Was freedom was a pipe dream.
it was.
Everything around us was about the institution of enslavement. The decision
Yes.
makers who were going to decide to free us owned slaves.
Mm,
So I remember Adam Smith writing about that. He's talking about the wealth of nations and so on, and deciding on, looking on the society, and talked about the fact that
mm,
this institution of slavery will never change because the owners, the legislators, the people who would make that change are slave owners. Why?
yes.
How did it change? Let's remember, it's not simply the goodness and a change of heart on the part of the British. Yes, that happened. Some of them, we had a whole set of missionaries and so on who were on our side. But
Yes.
the main reason this pipe dream became a reality was our fight. Our fight. We burned down the plantation. We
Mm.
made noise. We made the system of slavery ungovernable.
Yes. I see some comments here, even like on TikTok, saying dreams can be manifested into reality. All changes come from this, so we should use it. Another person said modern slavery still exists. It's not a race thing. But I think the most important thing, what we are picking up here, is that there is a power which the people have got to recognize, which is within them. And I always say this from a Christian perspective: they that know their God shall do exploits. And I juxtapose it with individuals to say that they that know themselves and know the power that they have, they can do exploits and do wonders in collectively working together to change and to move the hands of those who believe that they have the power. But really and truly, as you rightly say, Professor, we really, the people, have that ultimate power. But do we know?
Absolutely. I think about emancipate yourself from mental slavery. We've been
Yes,
talking about it for decades. A pipe
yes,
dream.
yes,
We all are dreaming for the day when even our leaders' minds are emancipated, where
yes.
they truly go take power and represent us.
Mm.
These are all dreams and aspirations, but we have to fight for them to make them a reality.
Well, Professor, listen, I want to thank you so much for coming on tonight. And we can just finish up with these last bit here. As you said,
Yes. Well, I wrap up by just saying, listen, our voice matters in a democracy. Our responsibility is to actively participate. We can't be
mm,
silent. We can't just
yes,
chat. We have to do things,
yes,
right? And in the context of our current governance crisis, and we didn't get a chance to get into the details, but I think you've been talking a lot about it. Everybody knows we have a
yes,
governance crisis right now,
yes.
and it is imperative that our voice is heard. And
Maybe
I
maybe
like
that's our next show will be the government crisis or something like that.
absolutely, and I want to remind the listeners, Edmund Burke said it, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing,
But
right?
but, but it's got to be good people.
So we are good people. So listen, we have to do something, right?
Yes.
And of course, my final statement is the power of the people is greater than the people in power.
I
Thank you
like that.
so much. It was
Michelle Clark, is that what you always say? Someone is online. The power of the people is greater than the people in power. Michelle, say yes. If that's what, as a colleague of mine, she always says it and always remind me all the while. The power of the people is greater than the people in power, and that's a good way to finish. And ladies and gentlemen, just to let you know, what we have decided is to continue this sort of discussion every 2 weeks, and we'll have different persons. Professor, she has committed her time, because what we said is that we're seeing a lot of discussions going on all over, but there's not a continuity, and some of the discussions might not be sexy or very virally, but we are dealing with the meat and the substance of things that is very important that people are educated, and it's very important that people understand and people know exactly. One of the things I'll say is that in essence, the power of one's voice is not just a personal expression, but a collective force that shapes the destiny of a democratic society. It underscores the idea that each individual, regardless of background or status, has a vital role to play in an ongoing evolution of a democratic nation. The strength of democracy lies in the active and engaged participation of its citizens, making their voice a cornerstone of political, social, and cultural progress. Is that a good summing up, Professor? There.
Yes, it is. You know, it is an
Mhm.
important part of how we organize society. Our voices must be heard, and if it's not, then somebody else's voice will dominate.
Somebody, that's a key thing. If we don't get our voice in, somebody else will, right? And as I always say, sometimes, for those who believe that they stay apart and they don't want to get involved in politics, there's someone who is going to be eyeballing and say, I need to get in there. I need to get in there. So therefore, we've got to get in there first, isn't it?
Absolutely. That minority voice will continue.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well,
All right.
ladies and
Thank
gentlemen,
you so much for having me.
thank you, Professor. Thank you. Have a good night and all the best. And we'll come again next couple weeks from here. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. Thank you, those who are on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. And remember to like and subscribe and share this video. We keep it within 1 hour, so therefore it can be very clean and succinct and straight to the point, not going around in too many circles. And we're gonna have the next show in the next couple of weeks' time, with Professor Rosalie, and on the 11th of February, and we're going to take it from there as much as possible, and going further. Let me just say bye bye to different person. Michelle Clark, thank you. Rosemary, thank you very much, and peace out, and God bless you, and see